stationary, 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 right?
Through time-lapse photography, the velocity of these clouds has been dramatically increased. While they were actually drifting over the mountains at approximately 27 miles per hour, they now have the appearance of moving at well over 100, 4 times their normal speed. If the clouds were stationary and the Earth was revolving underneath them, this is how it would appear if the Earth was spinning at 100 miles per hour. Yet we're told that the Earth is spinning at 10 times that speed. Consider this. Those who maintain that the Earth is a globe that spins suggest that people standing at the equator are being whirled around at approximately 1,000 miles an hour. They further maintain that the Earth is spinning around the Sun at a speed of 67,000 miles per hour, and that our Sun is supposedly racing around the center of our galaxy at some 600,000 miles per hour. And yet, you and I both know that on many days it's possible to stand outside without a single hair being messed up by the breeze.
When I first started looking into the idea of a rotating Earth and really thinking about that and applying it to the everyday world I see, one of the first things I thought about were planes flying above. Actually, I couldn't find any type of relativity problem that used planes and a moving Earth. Now, there's tons of relativity problems out there showing trains and cars and other things that are moving on a surface that is assumed to not be moving. But there's nothing that accounts for an Earth moving with the planes. As it spins around its axis on the equator, you divide the circumference by the time it takes to make one revolution, which is 24 hours. And when you do that, you get roughly 1,038 miles per hour. Okay?
I'm on the 19th chapter. All of this has been filled with just excellent information, stuff everyone should know. I mean, this is literally the Bible for flat Earth. You should get this if you're a flat Earth believer or you're someone who's questioning the flat Earth. This is a book you have to have. So I'm going to read straight from chapter 19, and there's a segment talks about centrifugal force, and I've never heard this brought up in the group. So I just want you guys to hear this, okay? This is beautiful. So says the problem with the gravitational theory is that according to that theory, the gravitational attraction to the Earth by all persons and objects remain the same at all places on the Earth. So what he's saying is gravity is the same everywhere on Earth, according to the theory, okay? So assuming that's correct, that means that the gravitational force at the North Pole is the same as the gravitational force at the equator. That poses a very real problem if the Earth is spinning as alleged. Here's why. That is because the centrifugal force decreases every mile towards the North Pole. So think of it like this. You're on a giant merry-go-round, right? But the merry-go-round is a ball. If you're at the equator and the merry-go-round spinning around, there's more centrifugal force than if you're at the North Pole. So that's because the centrifugal force decreases every mile towards the North Pole, where the centrifugal force is ultimately reduced to 0 at the North Pole because the North Pole is the axis of the alleged spinning Earth. Consequently, the speed of the Earth's spin at those more northern and southern latitudes from the equator would be slower than the speed at the equator.
And so we assume right here that this is the Earth rotating at 1,038 miles per hour. And so what I want to do is look at this atmosphere and look at 3 points and 3 elevations. At this moment, we expect all of these points of air to make one complete revolution and come back to the same spot in 24 hours, right? Because the atmosphere moves with the Earth. The atmosphere never gets left behind. So right off the bat, since we know the velocity is equal to distance divided by time, we can say that VA, the velocity of point A, is greater than the velocity of point B, which is greater than the velocity of point C. Because point A has a longer distance to travel in 24 hours than point B, and point B has a longer distance than C. Hot air rises, as we know, and cool air sinks, right? So how does the air speed up? When it's heated, it rises, but then it has to start moving faster. Now, even if it's only a little bit faster, the difference in these velocities, if you calculate them, isn't much, but they do have to be greater, or they will start to get left behind.
If a telescope is pointing at a star and both are stationary, then obviously the light comes straight into the telescope. In 1729, Bradley found that he had to tip his telescope forward very slightly to get a star in the centre of his telescope. It was assumed that this was due to the motion of the Earth around the Sun. Let us assume that the telescope was moving at 5 miles an hour and had to be tipped 5 degrees. This 5-degree tipping, however, could equally be caused by the ether moving at 5 miles an hour, carrying the stars around the Earth. As we see here, the light would be coming in at the same angle and the telescope would still have to be tipped 5 degrees. So tipping the telescope does not tell us whether it is the starlight moving or the telescope moving. However, there is a simple experiment that can determine whether it was the Earth that was moving or the ether and starlight. All that you had to do was record the tipping required for any particular star, then fill the telescope with water, which greatly slows down the speed of light in the telescope. So here is the moving telescope filled with water, tipped at 5 degrees, and you can see that the starlight does not now reach the eyepiece at the bottom. This is because the starlight moves much more slowly when passing through water. However, if the telescope is tipped further, say 10 degrees, then the starlight will then be visible again in the eyepiece. It has to be tipped further because the light is now slower when in the telescope. But if the starlight is going past the telescope at 5 miles an hour, then when it is filled with water, no further tipping is needed because the light is coming in at 5 degrees anyway. The starlight stays on the same path but is only travelling slower in the water. To recap, if it is the telescope that is moving, then when it is filled with water, it has to be tipped further to see the star. If the telescope is stationary and the starlight drifting past us, then it does not have to be tipped further. In 1871, George Biddle Airy, the Astronomer Royal, performed this experiment.
Hopefully that makes sense for everyone. Follow along. Now let me try and wrap your head around this. So this is one of the ways I thought the globe doesn't make sense, is because if the globe is spinning and they say it's even pear-shaped because of the spin, then the water should pool around the middle. We should have no land around the equator. There should just be water around the equator, and then the land would be more near the poles or more near the southern and northern hemispheres. But because there's no spin and there's no centrifugal force and there's land around the equator, I really started to dive into this flat earth thing, and then it dawned on me that moonlight's cold. I started testing it, and then when all the science was basically leaving the globe and coming to flat earth in my mind, and I realized that the Bible said the earth is the center of the universe, and I had missed that the whole time because I didn't start out a believer. I was atheist. I spent 5 years researching the Bible, trying to understand how it was wrong. And it turns out I couldn't find anything wrong about it. There's parts that you might disagree with, but you can't debunk the Bible as historically accurate. And the message in there, it stands.
What is wrong with you people? Earth is